The heat from the burning barn hit Abigail Kane's face like the wrath of God himself, and all she could do was stand there watching the last piece of her old life turn to ash under the New Mexico sky. The year was 1882, and the desert town of Aztec seemed determined to swallow her whole now that her husband was 6 feet under. She had buried Samuel 2 weeks ago, and already the vultures were circling, though these vultures wore suits and carried ledgers instead of wings and talons. The sheriff stood beside her, his weathered face showing something that might have been sympathy if lawmen were allowed such luxuries. "Mrs. Kane, I got no choice in this matter. The bank's got papers saying your husband owed near $3,000. That barn was collateral." "Samuel never told me about any debts," Abigail said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. She was 24 years old, and her husband had been 39 when a horse kicked him in the chest and stopped his heart. They had been married for 3 years, and apparently she had known him even less than that brief time suggested. "Well, madam, ignorance does not change what's owed. The bank's coming for the house next if you cannot settle accounts." Abigail watched the flames climb higher into the cloudless sky. Around her, a small crowd had gathered, though none offered help or comfort. In a town like Aztec, debt was contagious, and association with the afflicted was dangerous. She recognized most of the faces. Martha Green from the general store, old Pete Harrison who ran the livery, the Donovan brothers who worked at the mine. All of them had shared meals with her and Samuel at church socials. Now they looked at her like she carried plague. "How long do I have?" she asked the sheriff. "Bank president says 1 week. If you cannot pay, they'll auction the property to cover what's owed. 1 week. 7 days to somehow conjure $3,000 from thin air or lose everything. The house was small, but it was hers, or had been. The land was nothing special, just scrub and dust like everything else around Aztec, but it was home. More importantly, it was shelter. Without it, she would be completely destitute." The sheriff tipped his hat and walked away, his duty discharged. The crowd began to disperse, whispers following them like tumbleweeds. Abigail stood alone until the barn collapsed inward with a shower of sparks and a sound like breaking bones. She walked back to the house as the sun began its descent toward the San Juan Mountains. Inside, everything looked the same as it had that morning, but the walls felt thinner somehow, as if they were already becoming transparent. She sat at the kitchen table and tried to think. $3,000. She could sell everything she owned and maybe raise 100. Maybe. Her wedding ring might fetch $10. The furniture was worn and common. Samuel's tools were already sold to pay for his funeral. She had no family to turn to. Her parents had died when she was 17, taken by fever within days of each other. Samuel had been a widower looking for a wife, and she had been an orphan looking for security. It had not been a love match, but it had been companionship. Now even that was gone. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. For a moment, she considered not answering. It could only be more bad news. But habit and propriety made her rise and open it. A cowboy stood on her porch, hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with the sun-darkened skin of someone who lived outdoors. His eyes were a startling gray-blue, like storm clouds over the desert. She guessed he was in his mid-20s, maybe 26 or 27. Dust covered his clothes and a bedroll was strapped to his back. "Mrs. Kane," he said, his voice low and rough but not unkind. "Yes. My name is Yates Morgan. I heard about your situation in town. The debts." Abigail felt her spine stiffen. "If you are here to offer charity, I do not need it." "Not charity, madam. I am here to make a business proposition." Despite herself, curiosity overtook pride. "What kind of proposition?" Yates Morgan glanced past her into the house, then back at her face. "Might I come in? This is not a conversation for the porch." Every rule of propriety said she should refuse. A widow, alone with a strange man. The gossips would have a feast, but Abigail was past caring about gossip. In a week she would be homeless. What did reputation matter then? She stepped aside and let him enter. He was polite enough to stop just inside the door, not presuming to go further without invitation. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, probably not more than 25. But his eyes looked older, the way men's eyes did after they had seen hard things. "Say what you came to say," Abigail told him. Yates turned his hat in his hands. "I heard in town that the bank is demanding $3,000 or they will take your property. News travels fast." "In a small town, yes, madam, it does. I also heard that your husband died sudden and you knew nothing about his debts. That's true, though I don't see how it concerns you. I would like to pay those debts for you." The words hung in the air between them, so unexpected that Abigail could not immediately process them. When she did, anger flared hot in her chest. "I already told you I don't want charity. And I already told you this is business. I will pay your debts, all $3,000. In exchange, you will marry me." Abigail actually laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "Marry you? I don't even know you." "No, madam, you don't. But you need money and I need a wife. Seems like our problems might solve each other." "Why would you possibly need a wife badly enough to pay $3,000 for one?" Yates met her eyes steadily. "I just inherited land from my uncle up in Colorado. Good land with water and timber, but the inheritance comes with a condition. I have to be married and settled on the property within 2 months, or it goes to my cousin instead. My uncle did not approve of the wandering life, so marry someone else, someone you actually know." "I have been wandering for 7 years, madam. I don't have anyone, and time is running short. I heard about your situation and thought maybe we could help each other. You get to keep your home and clear your debts. I get to claim my inheritance. After a year, if you want to go your own way, I will give you a fair divorce and enough money to start fresh somewhere else." Abigail sat down heavily in the nearest chair. The proposal was insane. Marry a complete stranger. But then, she had barely known Samuel when she married him. At least this Yates Morgan was being honest about his motives up front. "I need to think," she said. "Yes, madam." "I will be at the boarding house. You have until tomorrow evening. After that, I will need to move on and find another solution." He placed his hat back on his head and moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it is worth, Mrs. Kane, I am not a bad man. I don't drink overmuch. I have never struck a woman. I can work hard and I know how to treat people decent. I cannot offer you love, but I can offer you respect and security. Sometimes that is enough." Then he was gone, leaving Abigail alone with an impossible decision. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat up tallying her options, which did not take long because she only had 2. Refuse Yates Morgan's offer, lose everything and end up destitute. Or accept, marry a stranger and at least have a chance at a future. By dawn, she had made her choice. It was not really a choice at all. She found Yates at the boarding house just as the sun was climbing over the eastern hills. He was sitting on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the town wake up. When he saw her, he stood. "I accept your offer," Abigail said without preamble, "but I have conditions of my own." "I am listening." "You said after a year I could leave if I wanted. I want that in writing. Legal papers that say I can go my own way with enough money to start over." "Agreed. And until we know each other better, there will be separate rooms. This is a business arrangement, not a real marriage." Something flickered in Yates' eyes, but he nodded. "Separate rooms, you have my word. Then we have an agreement." Yates held out his hand and Abigail shook it. His grip was firm but not crushing, his palm calloused from hard work. "I will go to the bank this morning and settle your debts. Can you be ready to travel by tomorrow?" "Travel where?" "To Colorado. To the property. The sooner we get there and establish residence, the better." Abigail thought of the little house, the only home she had known for 3 years. Leaving it should hurt more than it did. Instead, she felt oddly free. "I can be ready." "Good. Meet me at the bank at 10. We will settle the debts and see about getting married today if the preacher is available. Today? No point in waiting. We both know what this is." He was right, of course. Waiting would only make it more awkward. 10 o'clock then. The bank president was a round man named Horace Kettleman who looked disappointed when Yates walked in with a letter of credit from a Denver bank. He looked even more disappointed when he heard about the impending marriage. "Most irregular," he huffed, counting out the money to settle Samuel's debts. "Most irregular indeed." "But legal," Yates said mildly, "unless you have some objection to filing the payment." Kettleman had no objection that could be voiced aloud, though his face suggested he had plenty he would like to say. The debt was cleared, papers were signed, and Abigail walked out of the bank a free woman. Or as free as someone could be who had just agreed to marry a stranger. The preacher was surprised but willing. Reverend Michaels had known Abigail since she arrived in Aztec and seemed genuinely pleased that she would not be destitute. If he had doubts about the hasty marriage, he kept them to himself. They needed witnesses, and Yates found 2 men at the saloon who were sober enough to stand straight and write their names. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Abigail wore her regular dress, brown calico with a white collar. Yates wore his regular clothes too, though he had brushed the worst of the dust off. She noticed he had shaved that morning. That small courtesy touched her more than it probably should have. "Do you, Yates Morgan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Abigail Kane, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The words stuck in her throat for just a moment. Then she thought of the burning barn, of Kettleman's satisfied smile, of having nowhere to go and no one to turn to. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Yates looked at her questioningly, giving her the choice. Abigail leaned forward quickly and brushed her lips against his cheek. It seemed safer than a real kiss. His skin was warm and smelled like soap and leather. They signed the marriage certificate, the witnesses signed as well, and just like that, Abigail Kane became Abigail Morgan. Her second marriage, and somehow even stranger than the first. "I will arrange for a wagon tomorrow," Yates said as they walked out of the small church. "We can load your belongings and head north. It is a hard journey, about a week if the weather holds. I don't have many belongings. Then we will travel light." That evening, Abigail packed everything she wanted to keep into 2 trunks and a carpet bag. It was not much. Clothes, a few books, her mother's quilt, a daguerreotype of her parents. The furniture would stay with the house. Let whoever bought it have some use from it. Yates had taken a room at the boarding house for them both, but true to his word, he had arranged for 2 rooms. Abigail's was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand. She lay awake listening to the sounds of the town through the thin walls, wondering what she had gotten herself into. In the next room, Yates was also awake, wondering the same thing. He had told Abigail the truth about the inheritance, but not the whole truth. Yes, his uncle had left him land in Colorado. Yes, there was a marriage requirement. What he had not mentioned was that he had fallen for Abigail the moment he saw her standing in front of that burning barn, back straight and chin high, despite losing everything. He had been passing through Aztec on his way north when he saw the fire, saw her, and heard the gossip. The idea had come to him fully formed. Pay her debts, marry her, give them both a chance. But he could not tell her that. She would think him crazy or worse, some kind of predator taking advantage of her desperation. So he had framed it as business, as mutual benefit. In time, maybe she would come to care for him. Or maybe she would take her freedom after a year and disappear. Either way, at least she would be safe and provided for. That was worth $3,000 of his inheritance. They left Aztec at dawn with a hired wagon and a team of sturdy horses. Abigail took one last look at the little house as they rolled away, then resolutely faced forward. The past was done. Only the future remained. The journey north was long and dusty. They followed old trails through high desert country, passing through scattered settlements and long stretches of empty land. Yates drove the wagon while Abigail sat beside him, and slowly they began to talk. At first, it was just practical things. When to stop for water, what supplies they needed. But gradually, the conversations deepened. "Where are you from originally?" Abigail asked on the second day as they crossed a wide plain dotted with juniper trees. "Kansas," Yates said. "Little farm outside of Abilene. My father grew wheat. What made you leave?" "My parents died when I was 18. Fever like yours. The farm went to pay their debts and I headed west to find work. I have been moving ever since." 7 years is a long time to wander. It is. But I never found a place that felt like home. Maybe I was not looking hard enough. Or maybe I was waiting for something. "And you think Colorado will be different?" Yates was quiet for a moment, his hands easy on the reins. "I think having something of my own will be different. Land that belongs to me. A place to build something lasting. I am tired of drifting." Abigail understood that. She had been drifting too in her own way. From her parents' home to Samuel's house, never really belonging anywhere. "Tell me about the land," she said. "What is it like?" "I have not seen it myself yet, but my uncle wrote that it is in a valley near the Dolores River. Good grass for cattle, timber in the hills, a cabin that needs work but is sound enough to live in. He ran a small herd there for 15 years before his heart gave out. It sounds nice." "I hope it will be." He glanced at her. "I know this is not what you would have chosen. But I will do my best to make it a good life. That is a promise." The sincerity in his voice made something warm unfold in Abigail's chest. "I believe you." They made camp that night beside a small creek, the water running clear and cold from the mountains. Yates built a fire while Abigail prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. It was domestic in a way that felt both strange and comfortable. After they ate, they sat by the fire watching the stars come out. The desert sky was vast and crowded with light, the Milky Way a glowing river overhead. "I used to think the stars were holes in the floor of heaven," Abigail said softly. "My mother told me that. She said the light was shining through from where the angels walked." "That is a nice thought. Do you believe in heaven, Yates?" He considered the question. "I believe there has to be something more than this. Otherwise, what is the point of trying to be good? Samuel did not try very hard to be good, I think. He left me with debts I knew nothing about. He lied by omission every day of our marriage. That was not your fault, I know. But it makes me wonder what else I did not see, what else I was blind to." Yates stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "We all have blind spots, things we don't see because we don't want to or because we trust too much. That doesn't make you foolish, it makes you human." Abigail looked at him across the flames. In the firelight, his face was all plains and shadows, handsome in a rough way. "Why are you really doing this, Yates? The truth this time?" He met her eyes, and for a long moment she thought he might actually tell her, but then he looked away. "I told you the truth. I need a wife to claim my inheritance. You needed help. It is that simple." It was not simple and they both knew it, but Abigail let it go. Some truths took time to surface. They fell into a routine as the days passed. Yates drove during the cooler morning hours. Then they would stop during the heat of midday to rest the horses. Abigail would often walk during the afternoon, stretching her legs while Yates managed the wagon. In the evenings, they made camp and shared meals and conversation. Abigail learned that Yates had worked as a ranch hand, a railroad laborer, a freight driver, and a dozen other jobs during his wandering years. He read when he could find books and had taught himself basic carpentry and blacksmithing. He was quiet but not shy, thoughtful but not brooding. He had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, and a gentleness with the horses that spoke to his character. Yates learned that Abigail had been educated, unusual for a woman of her circumstances. Her father had been a schoolteacher before the fever took him, and he had insisted his daughter learn to read and cipher properly. She loved books, especially poetry, though she had not read much during her marriage to Samuel. She could cook and sew and manage a household. She was stronger than she looked, both physically and in spirit, and she was beautiful. Yates tried not to dwell on that fact, tried to keep his thoughts businesslike and appropriate. But it was hard when she sat beside him every day, when her laugh made something in his chest tighten, when the desert wind pulled strands of her dark hair loose from her bun, and he wanted nothing more than to reach out and tuck them back. On the fifth night, they camped in the foothills where the desert was giving way to pine forests. The air was cooler here, sharp with the scent of evergreen. Abigail washed her face and hands in the creek, then sat on a fallen log to brush out her hair. She usually kept it pinned up, but in the privacy of camp, she let it down. Yates came back from tending the horses and stopped dead at the sight of her. Her hair fell in dark waves past her shoulders, gleaming in the last light of day. She looked young and free and heartbreakingly lovely. "Sorry," he said, turning away. "I did not mean to intrude." "You are not intruding. This is your camp as much as mine." He busied himself with the fire, trying not to stare, but Abigail was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Do you regret this? The marriage, I mean, the arrangement?" Yates looked up, surprised. "No, not for a moment, do you?" "I did not think so, but sometimes I wonder if I have trapped you. $3,000 is a lot of money to spend on a stranger." "You have not trapped me, Abigail. I made my choice with my eyes open." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And you are not really a stranger anymore, not after 5 days on the trail together." A small smile touched her lips. "No, I suppose not. I know that you snore lightly when you sleep on your back, and that you prefer your coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and that you are kind to animals and patient with people. That is more than I knew about Samuel after a month of marriage. He was not good to you, was he?" The question was quiet but direct. Abigail was silent for a moment, still brushing her hair with slow, measured strokes. "He was not cruel, but he was not kind either. He was just there. We lived in the same house, ate at the same table, slept in the same bed. But we were never truly together, if that makes sense. We were two people occupying the same space. That sounds lonely." It was. She set down the brush and began braiding her hair. "But I thought it was normal. I thought marriage was supposed to be a practical arrangement. Companionship and shared duties. I did not expect passion or romance." "What do you expect now?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Abigail finished her braid and tied it off. "I don't know any more. I suppose I will find out when we get to Colorado." They reached the property on the 7th day, just as the sun was setting behind the western peaks. The valley opened before them like a gift, green and lush after the desert. The Dolores River wound through it, silver in the fading light. Pine forests covered the surrounding hills, and meadows thick with grass spread along the valley floor. The cabin sat on a slight rise overlooking the river. It was small, maybe 3 rooms, built from hand-hewn logs with a stone chimney at one end. The roof needed patching and the porch sagged a bit, but it was solid. Behind the cabin stood a barn and a corral, both in better condition than the house. "It is beautiful," Abigail said, her voice full of wonder. Yates felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had worried she would find it rough and disappointing. "It will need work, but the bones are good. It is perfect." They unloaded the wagon in the gathering dusk, carrying Abigail's trunks and their supplies into the cabin. Inside it was dusty and smelled of disuse, but someone had left furniture behind. A table and chairs. A bed frame in what must be the main bedroom. A smaller bed in the second room. A cast iron stove in the kitchen area. "I will take the smaller room," Yates said. "You should have the larger one." Abigail wanted to protest, but she was too tired. The journey had been long, and the thought of a real bed, even a dusty one, was too appealing to refuse. "We can discuss it tomorrow." They made a simple meal and ate in exhausted silence. Then Abigail took a candle and retreated to the larger bedroom while Yates settled himself in the smaller one. Through the thin walls, they could hear each other moving about. It was strange and intimate and oddly comforting. Abigail lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Colorado night. Owls calling in the forest, the river murmuring over stones, the wind in the pines, and through it all, the quiet sounds of Yates settling in the next room, her husband, her partner in this strange bargain. She had thought she might feel trapped or frightened, alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew. But instead, she felt something else entirely. She felt hope. The next morning, Abigail woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed quickly and found Yates in the kitchen, cooking breakfast on the old stove. "I found some supplies in the root cellar," he said, looking pleased. "My uncle must have kept it stocked. There is flour and salt and lard, even some preserved vegetables. Enough to last us until we can get to a town for more." They ate breakfast on the porch, watching the valley wake up. Deer grazed in the far meadow. A hawk circled overhead. The morning sun turned the river to gold. "What do you want to do first?" Abigail asked. "We should inventory what we have and what we need. Then I will need to ride to the nearest town and file the residency papers. The sooner we establish legal residence, the sooner the property is officially mine." "How far is the nearest town?" "Maybe a day's ride. Place called Norwood." "We will need to stock up on supplies there too. Food, tools, whatever we cannot produce here." He glanced at her. "I should be gone 2 days, maybe 3. Will you be all right here alone?" The question made Abigail realize how much had changed. 2 weeks ago, she could not have imagined being alone in the wilderness. Now it seemed manageable, even appealing. "I will be fine. I can start cleaning the cabin and making an inventory of what is here." Yates looked relieved. "There is a rifle in the barn if you need it. You know how to shoot." "Samuel taught me. I am not an expert, but I can hit what I aim at." "Good. I doubt you will need it, but better to have it." He left the next morning, riding one of the wagon horses and leading the other to carry supplies back. Abigail stood on the porch and watched him ride down the valley until he disappeared around a bend in the river. Then she turned to face the cabin and rolled up her sleeves. For 2 days, she worked from dawn to dusk. She swept and scrubbed and aired out the musty rooms. She washed the windows and beat the dust from the old mattress. She sorted through the supplies in the root cellar and the barn, taking stock of tools and equipment. The work was hard and physical, but satisfying in a way that her old life had never been. In the evenings, She sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the light fade from the valley. The solitude was profound but not oppressive. For the first time in years, Abigail felt like she could breathe fully. There was no one watching her, judging her, expecting anything from her. Just the land and the sky and her own thoughts for company. She found herself thinking about Yates more than she expected, wondering if he had made it to Norwood safely, what he was doing, when he would return. She had only known him for 10 days, and yet his absence created a hollowness she had not anticipated. On the third afternoon, she was beating a rug on the porch when she heard hoofbeats. Yates rode into the yard leading a heavily loaded pack horse. He looked tired but pleased. "You have been busy," he said, dismounting and looking at the transformed cabin. The windows gleamed. The porch was swept. Freshly washed curtains fluttered in the breeze. "So have you, from the looks of it." Abigail nodded at the loaded pack horse. "Flour, sugar, coffee, salt, beans, dried fruit, and some fresh vegetables. Also fabric, thread, lamp oil, ammunition, and a few other necessities." He grinned. "And something special." "What?" He rummaged in one of the packs and pulled out a brown paper package. Inside were 3 books. "The selection was not great, but I thought you might like them." Abigail took the books with something close to reverence. One was a collection of Wordsworth's poetry. Another was a novel by Dickens. The third was a practical guide to frontier farming. "You remembered I like to read. You mentioned it. I figured you might need something to occupy your time when the work is done." The gesture touched her deeply. Samuel had never once thought about her interests or brought her gifts. "Thank you, Yates, truly." He looked embarrassed by her gratitude. "It was nothing. Just a few books." But it was not nothing. It was thoughtfulness and attention. It was seeing her as a person, not just a wife or a worker. It was the kind of small kindness that could, over time, build into something more. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Yates spent his days working the land, repairing fences, clearing brush, and preparing the meadows for cattle. Abigail managed the household, cooked their meals, tended a vegetable garden she planted near the cabin, and slowly made the rough house into a home. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk, sometimes about their plans for the property, sometimes about their pasts, sometimes about nothing important at all, just the comfortable conversation of 2 people getting to know each other. Abigail learned that Yates had a beautiful singing voice, low and rich, and sometimes he would sing old ballads as he worked. She learned that he whittled when he was thinking, his knife shaping wood into smooth, graceful forms. She learned that he was honorable to his core, that his word was absolute, and that he was far more intelligent than his lack of formal education might suggest. Yates learned that Abigail had a sharp wit and a love of debate. She could argue philosophy or politics with passion and intelligence. She had a green thumb and could coax plants to grow in the poorest soil. She was resourceful and creative, solving problems with materials at hand, and she hummed while she worked, tuneless little melodies that made him smile. Summer deepened into its full glory. The meadows bloomed with wildflowers. The river ran cold and clear from snowmelt. They worked hard and ate well and slept soundly, and slowly, almost without realizing it, they began to fall in love. It was the little things that did it. The way Yates always made sure Abigail had the best portion of meat at dinner. The way Abigail mended his shirts without being asked. The way they began to move around each other in the small kitchen like dancers who knew the steps by heart. The way their conversations grew longer and more intimate as the weeks passed. One evening in late July, they sat on the porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the valley. Lightning flickered in the purple clouds. Thunder rumbled like distant artillery. The air smelled of rain and ozone. "I love storms," Abigail said, her face tilted up to watch the show. Samuel always hated them. He would close all the shutters and hide inside until they passed, but I think they are beautiful. They are, Yates agreed, though he was looking at her instead of the storm. She turned and caught him staring. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Abigail said softly, "This is not what I expected." "What do you mean, this, us? I thought it would be awkward and difficult, living with a stranger, but you don't feel like a stranger anymore." "No," Yates said. "You don't." The rain started then, big drops that kicked up dust in the yard before the deluge came. They stayed on the porch, protected by the overhang, watching the storm transform the valley. The smell of wet earth and sage filled the air. "Yates," Abigail said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "What happens when the year is up?" He had known this question would come eventually, but he still was not prepared for it. "That is up to you. I made you a promise. If you want to leave, I will honor it." "And if I don't want to leave," his heart kicked hard against his ribs, "then you stay, for as long as you want, forever if you will have it." She was quiet for a long time, watching the rain. Then she said, "I think I would like forever." Yates felt like he could not breathe. "You mean that?" "I mean it. This place, this life, it is more than I ever hoped for. I don't want to leave unless you want me to." "I don't want you to leave. I never wanted you to leave. Abigail, I have to tell you something. The truth I should have told you from the start." He turned to face her fully. "I did need a wife for the inheritance. That part was true, but that is not why I married you." "Then why did you?" "Because I saw you standing in front of that burning barn, and you were the bravest, most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Because I heard your story and I wanted to help you. Because some part of me knew, even then, that you were meant to be mine and I was meant to be yours." Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "You paid $3,000 because you wanted to help me." "I paid $3,000 because you were worth it, because you are worth everything." She moved then, crossing the small space between them and taking his face in her hands. "You foolish, wonderful man." Then she kissed him. It was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding. This was a real kiss, deep and sweet and full of promise. Yates wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close, and for the first time since they had met, there was no distance between them. No walls, no careful politeness, no business arrangement, just two people who had found each other against all odds. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Abigail laughed a little shakily. "I think we can stop having separate rooms now." Yates grinned, joy spreading through him like warmth. "I think that sounds like an excellent idea." They stood together in the rain-washed evening, holding each other, and watched the storm pass over the valley. The setting sun broke through the clouds in shafts of golden light, painting rainbows across the sky. That night, Abigail moved her things into the larger bedroom, and Yates helped her carry them. They made up the bed together with fresh sheets, working side by side in comfortable silence. And when they finally climbed into bed together, it felt natural and right, as if they had been doing this for years instead of just deciding to that very day. Yates held her close, marveling at the softness of her, the way she fit perfectly against his side. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you." "I love you too," Abigail whispered back. "I did not think I could, not this fast, not this much, but I do." They talked late into the night, making plans and sharing dreams. They would buy cattle in the fall and start building their herd. They would expand the garden. They would fix up the barn and maybe add on to the cabin. They would build a life together, piece by piece, day by day. And eventually, when the talking gave way to other things, they came together as husband and wife, not just in name but in truth. It was tender and passionate and sometimes awkward in the way of new lovers, but it was perfect because it was them, choosing each other freely and completely. August came in hot and dry, and Yates made the long trip to Norwood again to purchase cattle. He came back with 20 head of good stock, mostly cows with a few young bulls. It was a small beginning, but it was theirs. Abigail helped him work the cattle, learning to ride and rope under his patient instruction. She was not a natural horsewoman, but she was determined, and determination counted for a lot on the frontier. By the end of the month, she could hold her own well enough to be useful. They worked hard through the fall, putting up hay for the winter and preserving food from the garden. Abigail canned vegetables and made preserves while Yates reinforced the barn and cut firewood. They were building something solid and enduring, and the satisfaction of that work was profound. In late September, Abigail realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then told Yates over breakfast one morning, "I think I might be with child." He looked up from his plate, his eyes going wide. "You think?" "I am almost certain. All the signs are there." Yates came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "A baby! We are going to have a baby!" Abigail laughed, feeling his joy as if it were her own. "Yes, come next spring if all goes well. We will need to make the cabin bigger, add on a room for the nursery. And we will need more supplies. Cloth for diapers and baby clothes. Maybe we should get a milk cow too for when the baby is weaned." "Yates, slow down. We have months yet." But he could not slow down. He was already planning, already thinking ahead to this new life they would bring into the world. Abigail watched him with a full heart, grateful beyond words for this unexpected turn her life had taken. The pregnancy progressed well through the fall and into winter. Abigail had some morning sickness early on, but nothing too severe. Yates fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and work less, until she finally had to tell him firmly that she was pregnant, not ill. "I need to stay active," she said. "Sitting around will not help me or the baby. I just want you both to be safe. We are safe. We have you." They spent the long winter evenings planning for the baby. Yates built a beautiful cradle from pine, carving it with careful attention to detail. Abigail sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands working steadily while they talked or read aloud to each other. The books Yates had bought in Norwood were read and reread until they could quote passages to each other. On Christmas, Yates surprised her with more books he had ordered special from Denver, including a volume of Emily Dickinson poems that made Abigail cry with happiness. "How did you know I would love this?" "Because I pay attention. Because I love you. Because making you happy makes me happy." It was the best Christmas Abigail had ever known. They had little in terms of material wealth, but they had each other and the promise of their growing family. That was enough. That was everything. Spring came late to the mountains that year, with snow falling well into April, but when it finally arrived, it came in a rush of green and birdsong and warming days. Abigail's belly was round and full now, the baby active inside her. She would feel it kick and move and call Yates over to place his hand on her stomach and feel the miracle of their child. "Boy or girl, what do you think?" he would ask. "Healthy. That is all I care about." But privately, Abigail hoped for a boy. A son with his father's gray-blue eyes and gentle strength. In late May, the pain started. Abigail had been hanging laundry when the first contraction hit, bending her double with its intensity. She made it into the house and called for Yates, who came running from the barn. "The baby is coming." Yates went pale. "Now, but it is too soon. You said June." "Babies come when they want to. We need to get ready." They had planned for this as best they could. Clean linens were ready. Water was heating on the stove, but the nearest midwife was in Norwood, a day's ride away. They were on their own. Yates helped Abigail into bed and did everything he could think of to make her comfortable. He brought her water and held her hand and tried not to panic as the contractions grew stronger and closer together. He had helped birth calves and foals, but this was different. This was the woman he loved, suffering through the ancient agony of bringing life into the world. "You are doing so well," he told her over and over. "You are so strong. I am here. I am right here." Abigail gripped his hand hard enough to hurt and tried to remember to breathe. The pain was overwhelming, coming in waves that crested and broke and left her gasping. But between the pains she could think, and what she thought was that she could do this. Women had been doing this since the beginning of time. She could do it too. The labor lasted through the afternoon and into the evening. As the sun set, painting the valley in shades of gold and rose, Abigail gave one final mighty push and their child entered the world. Yates caught the baby with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. "It is a boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a son." The baby cried, a strong, healthy sound that filled the cabin. Yates wrapped him in a clean cloth and placed him on Abigail's chest. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face, the dark hair and red cheeks, and felt her heart expand to hold this new and overwhelming love. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." They named him William after Yates's father. William Morgan, born on a spring evening in the Colorado mountains to parents who loved him beyond reason. The first weeks with the baby were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. William was a good baby, healthy and alert, with his father's eyes and his mother's dark hair. He nursed well and slept in the beautiful cradle Yates had made, and both his parents were utterly besotted. Yates proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with the baby. He would walk the floor with William when he fussed, singing the old ballads in his low voice until the baby settled. He changed diapers without complaint and got up in the night to bring the baby to Abigail for feeding. "You are good at this," Abigail told him one night, watching him rock their son. "I love him, and I love you. It makes everything else easy." As William grew from a newborn to an infant, Abigail and Yates settled into their new normal. The work of the ranch continued. The cattle herd grew. The garden flourished, and through it all the baby was there, the center of their world. In the fall, when William was 5 months old, Yates made another trip to Norwood for supplies. He came back with fabric for winter clothes, ammunition, flour, sugar, and a small wooden horse he had carved during the long evenings. "For William," he said, placing it on the table. "I know he is too young for it yet, but he will grow into it." Abigail picked up the toy and examined the careful craftsmanship. The horse was smooth and perfectly shaped, just the right size for small hands. "You made this." During the evenings at the boarding house, I had time to kill. She kissed him then, long and sweet. "You are a wonderful father and a wonderful husband. I try. You make it easy." That winter was harder than the first, with heavy snows that sometimes kept them inside for days at a time, but the cabin was warm and well-stocked and they had each other. Yates read aloud while Abigail sewed or knitted. William learned to sit up and then to crawl, exploring every corner of the small cabin with intense curiosity. They celebrated William's first birthday in May with a cake made from precious hoarded sugar and eggs from the chickens Yates had bought in the spring. The baby grabbed fistfuls of cake and smeared it everywhere, delighted with the sweetness and the attention. "Hard to believe it has been a year," Abigail said, watching her son explore the texture of frosting. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday. Sometimes it feels like he has always been here." "Both are true," Yates said. "Time is funny that way. You remember what we said a year ago, or rather 2 years ago now, about me leaving if I wanted to?" Yates grew still. "I remember. I don't think I ever want to leave. This is my home. You are my home. This life we have built is everything I never knew I needed. "You are my home too," Yates said softly. "You and William. My whole world is right here." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and small milestones. William grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's determination and his mother's quick mind. The ranch prospered. The herd grew to over 100 head. Yates built the addition to the cabin, giving them more space. Abigail planted an orchard of apple trees that would one day bear fruit. When William was 3, Abigail found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the spring, she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Abigail's mother. Rose was different from William. Where he had been calm and easy, she was spirited and demanding. She had Yates's blonde hair and Abigail's dark eyes, and from the moment she was born, she knew exactly what she wanted and was not afraid to make her desires known. "She is going to keep us on our toes," Yates said, walking the floor with the fussy newborn while William slept peacefully in his small bed. "She already is," Abigail agreed tiredly, but even exhausted she was happy. Her family was growing, her life was full. William proved to be a wonderful big brother once he got over the initial jealousy of sharing his parents' attention. He would bring Rose her toys and sing to her in an off-key imitation of his father's ballads. As she grew, they became inseparable, the quiet, thoughtful boy and the loud, spirited girl. By the time William was 6 and Rose was 3, the ranch was firmly established. Yates had built a reputation as an honest dealer with quality cattle. Neighbors had moved into the valley over the years, and there was a sense of community growing. A school had been established in Norwood, and Abigail was already teaching William his letters at home, preparing him for the day when he would join the other children there. One evening in late summer, after the children were in bed, Abigail and Yates sat on the porch as they had done for years. The valley spread before them in the gathering dusk, peaceful and beautiful. "You ever think about that day in Aztec?" Abigail asked. "When you knocked on my door and offered to pay my debts? Sometimes. It was the best decision I ever made. It was crazy. We barely knew each other. True. But sometimes the crazy decisions turn out to be the right ones." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing across her knuckles in a familiar gesture. "Do you ever regret it, saying yes to a stranger?" "Never. Not once." Abigail leaned her head on his shoulder. "You saved me, Yates, not just from the debts, but from a life without love, without real partnership. You showed me what marriage could be when it is built on respect and honesty and genuine affection. You saved me, too, from drifting, from loneliness, from never having a place to belong." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Abigail, more now than ever. I love you, too." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, one by one, filling the sky with light. From inside the cabin came the sounds of the children sleeping, the soft breathing, the occasional sigh or murmur, the sounds of life and hope and future. The next morning brought news that would change their comfortable routine. A rider came from Norwood with a message. The territorial government was offering contracts to supply beef to the army forts and Indian agencies. It was a significant opportunity, one that could make the ranch truly prosperous. Yates and Abigail discussed it at length. The contract would mean more work, more responsibility. They would need to hire hands to help manage the larger herd. They would need to make improvements to the property, build better facilities for handling and holding cattle. "It is a risk," Yates said. "We are doing well as we are. We don't need to expand." "But we could do more than just survive," Abigail countered. "We could build something substantial. Something to leave to William and Rose. Real security for our family." In the end, they decided to pursue the contract. Yates rode to the territorial capital to negotiate terms while Abigail managed the ranch and the children. He was gone for 2 weeks, and when he returned, he had a signed contract and a list of requirements they would need to meet. Over the next year, they transformed the ranch. They built better corrals and handling facilities. They hired 2 full-time ranch hands, good men who knew cattle and were willing to work hard. They increased the herd through careful breeding and selective purchases. Abigail managed the household and helped with the bookkeeping, her education proving invaluable as they navigated the business side of ranching. It was hard work, sometimes overwhelming, but they tackled it together, as they had tackled everything since that day in Aztec. And as the ranch grew, so did their confidence and their sense of accomplishment. William started school in Norwood when he turned 7, riding the 5 miles each way on his own pony. Rose, now 4, was already begging to go with him, but Abigail insisted she wait another year. The little girl was bright and energetic, always into something, always asking questions. She followed her father around the ranch when she could, learning about cattle and horses and the land. "She is going to be a rancher," Yates said one day, watching Rose try to rope a fence post with fierce determination. "Just like her old man. Maybe, or maybe she will be a teacher like my father, or a doctor, or anything she wants. That is the beauty of it. She has choices. Because we are building something that will give them choices. Both of them." That fall, their first large delivery of cattle to the Army fort went off without incident. The money they received was more than they had made in the previous 2 years combined. Yates deposited most of it in the bank in Norwood, saving it for the future, but he used some to buy Abigail a beautiful cook stove from a catalog, one with a warming oven and plenty of space. "You didn't have to do this," Abigail protested, though she was clearly delighted. "I wanted to. You work so hard. You deserve nice things. I already have everything I need. I know, but I still like giving you things you want." The years continued to pass in a blur of work and family and quiet satisfaction. William grew tall and serious, taking after his father in temperament and build. Rose remained spirited and bold, a force of nature in a small package. When she was 6, Abigail gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas. He was the easiest of their children, a peaceful baby who grew into a peaceful child, content to observe the world around him with quiet interest. 3 children, a thriving ranch, a marriage built on love and respect that grew stronger with each passing year. Abigail sometimes thought about the woman she had been back in Aztec, watching her barn burn and thinking her life was over. If she could go back and tell that woman what was coming, the joy and the love and the family, she would never believe it, but it was all true, all real, hard-won and precious. When William was 14, he started working the ranch full-time alongside his father, learning the business from the ground up. Rose, at 11, was still in school but helped every evening and weekend with a dedication that impressed everyone. Thomas, at 5, was content to tag along with whoever would let him, absorbing everything with his quiet attention. One evening, Yates and Abigail sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. William was teaching Thomas to rope. Rose was practicing her riding on her favorite horse. The valley was green and lush from spring rains. The herd in the distant pasture was fat and healthy. Everything they had worked for was bearing fruit. "Happy?" Yates asked, taking Abigail's hand. "So happy. Sometimes I am almost afraid to be this happy. Like it is too much and something will take it away." "Nothing is going to take it away. We have built this life together and it is solid. We have each other and we have our children and we have this land. That is not luck. That is love and work and commitment." Abigail squeezed his hand. Do you remember what you said to me that night in Aztec? That you could not offer me love, but you could offer me respect and security. I remember. I was lying through my teeth about the love part. She laughed. I thought as much. But even if it had been true, even if we had never fallen in love, I think I still would have been content. Because you were right. Respect and security are worth a lot. But this, she gestured to the children, the ranch, the life they had built. This is beyond anything I could have imagined. It is beyond anything I imagined too. I thought I would get my land and build a ranch, and that would be enough. I had no idea that the best part would be sharing it with you. They sat together as the light faded from the sky, holding hands the way they had for 15 years. The children's laughter rang out in the evening air. From the barn came the sounds of the horses settling for the night. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and grass. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang, and another answered. The wild was always there, just beyond the edge of the land they had tamed. But it did not frighten Abigail anymore. She had learned to live with the wild, to respect it and work with it rather than against it. Just as she had learned to live with love, that wild, unpredictable force that had taken her by surprise when she least expected it. As the children grew older, new challenges and joys emerged. William, at 16, was already being courted by several of the young women in the area, though he seemed more interested in cattle breeding than romance. Rose, at 13, was fiercely intelligent and had announced her intention to become a veterinarian, scandalizing some of the more traditional neighbors but earning her parents' full support. Thomas, at 7, was revealed to have a gift for music, able to pick up any instrument and coax a tune from it within hours. The ranch continued to prosper. The army contracts were renewed year after year. Yates's reputation as an honest dealer meant he could command top prices for his cattle. They expanded their holdings, buying adjacent land as it became available. They built a new, larger house, though they kept the original cabin standing as a reminder of where they had started. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Abigail with a trip to Denver. It was the first time she had been to a real city since leaving Kansas as a girl. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate at restaurants, attended the theater, and shopped in stores that seemed impossibly grand and well-stocked. But as wonderful as it all was, Abigail found herself eager to return home. The city was loud and crowded and overwhelming. She missed the quiet of the valley, the clean air, the sight of the mountains. She missed her children and her routines. "I think I have become a country woman through and through," she told Yates as they rode the train back toward Colorado. "Is that a bad thing? Not at all. It is exactly what I want to be." When they arrived home, all 3 children were waiting at the house with a celebration dinner they had prepared themselves. It was a chaotic, joyful evening full of laughter and stories, and the comfortable chaos of a family that loved each other deeply. That night, lying in bed in the new house, Abigail said, "I have been thinking about that day you came to my door in Aztec." "You think about it a lot," Yates observed with a smile. "I do, because it changed everything. But I realized something recently. You didn't just save me from the debts. You saved me from a life I did not even know was small and sad. You showed me that love is real, that partnership is possible, that life can be full and rich and meaningful. You did the same for me. I was drifting, just existing from day to day. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to build something lasting. We saved each other. We did." They held each other close. 2 people who had started as strangers brought together by desperation and circumstance, who had built a love story that would span decades. The years continued to unfold. William eventually did fall in love with a schoolteacher named Catherine who moved to Norwood. They married when he was 21, and Abigail gained a daughter-in-law she adored. Rose went east to study veterinary medicine, one of the first women to do so, supported every step of the way by her parents. Thomas discovered a love of teaching and decided to follow in his grandfather's footsteps, though he had never met the man. Abigail and Yates became grandparents when William and Catherine welcomed a daughter. Then another grandchild came, and another. Rose eventually returned to Colorado with a veterinary degree and opened a practice in Norwood, becoming the first female veterinarian in the region. Thomas went to teachers' college and came back to teach at the school he had once attended as a student. Through it all, through every joy and sorrow, every triumph and setback, Abigail and Yates remained partners. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled from years of work, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with time, tempered by shared experience and deep mutual respect. On their 30th anniversary, they stood together on the porch of the house they had built. The valley spread before them, dotted with cattle bearing their brand. The land was theirs, paid for and built up by 3 decades of hard work. Their children were grown and thriving. Their grandchildren were healthy and loved. It was everything they could have hoped for and more. "You remember what you said to me once?" Abigail asked. "That you paid $3,000 because I was worth it. I remember. You got quite the bargain, Morgan. I would have been worth at least $5,000. Yates laughed, that deep, warm laugh she had loved for 30 years. Noted, "I will remember that for our next life. Our next life." "I like the sound of that, so do I. Though I am pretty fond of this one too, so am I." They stood together watching the sun set over the mountains, just as they had done thousands of times before. The Wild West was not so wild anymore. Towns were growing. Railroads were spreading. The frontier was being tamed and settled. But here in their valley, with the mountains standing eternal watch, some things remained unchanged. Love, family, the satisfaction of work done well, the peace of a life lived with purpose and integrity. Yates pulled Abigail close and she leaned into his embrace. They had started as a widow blamed for debts she did not owe and a cowboy willing to pay them. They had become so much more. Partners, lovers, best friends, parents and grandparents, builders of a legacy that would outlast them both. "Thank you," Abigail said softly. "For what? For knocking on my door that day, for taking a chance on a desperate widow, for loving me when I didn't even know I wanted to be loved. Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a wandering cowboy, for building this life with me." They kissed then, a gentle kiss full of 3 decades of love and devotion. Around them, the valley settled into evening. Lights began to glow in the windows of the house as their family gathered for dinner. Grandchildren's laughter rang out, the sounds of home and belonging. It had all started with a debt and a desperate offer. It had become a love story for the ages, and they lived it fully, gratefully, together until the very end. Years later, when Yates and Abigail were both in their 70s, they would sit on that same porch and watch their great-grandchildren play in the yard. The ranch had been passed to William, who ran it with the same dedication his father had shown. Rose's veterinary practice was thriving, now run in partnership with her own daughter who had followed in her footsteps. Thomas's students consistently scored the highest in the region, a testament to his patience and skill. "We did good, didn't we?" Yates said one evening, his voice rougher now with age but still warm. "We did very good," Abigail agreed. "Any regrets?" "Not a single one. You, only that I didn't knock on your door sooner." Abigail laughed and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his the way they had for over 50 years. They had built something that would last long after they were gone, not just the ranch or the land or the material legacy, but a family bound by love. Children and grandchildren who knew what it meant to work hard, to treat people with respect, to build something meaningful. It had all started in Aztec, New Mexico, in 1882, when a widow stood accused of debts that were not hers and a cowboy said 4 words that would change everything. "I'll pay them all." From that moment, 2 strangers had become one family, one heart. One enduring love story that proved that sometimes the most desperate circumstances could lead to the most beautiful outcomes. And when Abigail finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76, with Yates holding her hand, her last words were simple and true. "Thank you for loving me." Yates followed her 3 months later, his heart simply giving out. Some said it was old age. But those who knew him best understood the truth. He had lived for her, and when she was gone, there was no reason to stay. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the valley, under the endless Colorado sky. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood together at the funeral, mourning their loss but celebrating their legacy. Because Yates and Abigail had shown them all what love could be when it was built on a foundation of respect, honesty, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment. They had shown them that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places, that courage and faith can transform tragedy into triumph, and that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to say, "I'll pay them all," to change not just one life, but generations to come. The ranch continued under William's stewardship, then passed to his children, and their children after that. Over the decades, the original cabin was preserved and eventually turned into a small museum, telling the story of Yates and Abigail Morgan, the cowboy and the widow who built an empire from dust and desperation and love. Visitors would come from all over to hear the tale. How a widow blamed for debts she didn't know was saved by a cowboy willing to pay them all. How a business arrangement became one of the greatest love stories the West had ever known. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew through the valley just right, some swore they could still see 2 figures sitting on the porch of that old cabin, holding hands and watching the sunset, together for all eternity. Their love had been tested by hardship and proven through time. It had created a family, built a legacy, and become a testament to the enduring power of choosing each other every single day, no matter what challenges arose. From the ashes of a burning barn and the weight of impossible debt, they had forged something beautiful and lasting. A love that would echo through the ages, reminding everyone who heard their story that true love is not just about passion or romance, though they had plenty of both. True love is about seeing someone in their darkest moment and saying, "I will stand with you." It is about building something together, piece by piece, day by day. It is about choosing each other over and over again, through good times and bad, through wealth and poverty, through health and sickness. It is about a cowboy who saw a widow in trouble and didn't walk away, and a widow brave enough to take a chance on a stranger who offered her not just money but hope. Their story was complete, their love fulfilled, their legacy secured. And somewhere in the valley they had loved so well, in the rustle of the pine trees and the rush of the river and the eternal presence of the mountains, Yates and Abigail Morgan lived on, together forever, exactly as they had always wanted. The end of their story was also a beginning, the start of a family line that would continue for generations, all tracing back to that one pivotal moment in Aztec, New Mexico, when a cowboy said 4 simple words that changed everything. "I'll pay them all." And he did. He paid the debts. He kept his promises. He loved her faithfully. And in return, he received more than he could have ever imagined. a wife who became his partner in every sense of the word, children who made him proud, a life rich with meaning and purpose. They had started with nothing but hope and determination. They had ended with everything that truly mattered. And their love story, born from desperation and debt in the dusty streets of a small New Mexico town, became a legend that would be told and retold, inspiring others to believe in the transformative power of love, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment. From widow and cowboy to partners and lovers to grandparents and legends, Yates and Abigail Morgan had lived a life worth celebrating, a love worth remembering, a story worth telling again and again for all time. And so it would be told, generation after generation, a testament to the enduring truth that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the greatest treasures come from simply being willing to say yes when opportunity knocks on your door. Their story was complete. Their ending was happy. Their legacy was secure. And their love remained eternal, a beacon of hope in an often harsh and unforgiving world, proving that even in the Wild West, even in the hardest times, love could conquer all.